The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany dining table as Simone Carter stood frozen outside the slightly open door of David's family study. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain it would burst right through her chest. The words she'd just heard made her legs feel like water, and she pressed her back against the cool hallway wall to keep from collapsing. "She's not one of us, son. You know that." The voice belonged to David's father, Robert Mitchell, cold and precise as a surgeon's blade. "This whole thing is a mistake that's going to cost our family everything we've worked for." Simone's engagement ring suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds on her finger. Just 30 minutes ago, she'd been floating on cloud nine, having arrived early to surprise David with homemade sweet potato pie, her grandmother Ruby's secret recipe that had won over every heart in their neighborhood back in Atlanta. She'd used her spare key, expecting to find the house empty since David said he'd be at work until 7. Instead, she'd walked into what felt like her worst nightmare. "The wedding is in 2 weeks, Dad. What am I supposed to do now?" David's voice cracked, and for a moment, Simone felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was defending her. Maybe he was about to tell his parents that their opinions didn't matter because he loved her. "You tell her the truth," Janet Mitchell's voice cut through the air like broken glass. "That this was all just a phase. A rebellion against everything we raised you to be. She'll understand, her kind always do." Her kind. The words hit Simone like a physical blow. She'd spent 3 years believing that David's parents had accepted her, that they'd grown to love her despite their initial coolness. She'd made excuses for their subtle comments, their way of speaking around her rather than to her during family dinners. She'd convinced herself that love would be enough to bridge any gap. "I can't just break up with her 2 weeks before the wedding," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Everyone will ask questions. The whole firm will be talking." "Better they talk now than watch you throw your career away later," Robert replied. "The Henderson account alone is worth more than what you'd make in 5 years. Do you really think Jonathan Henderson is going to trust his family's wealth to someone married to? Well, you know what I mean." Simone's hand flew to her mouth to stifle the sob threatening to escape. Jonathan Henderson was David's biggest client, a man who'd made his fortune in real estate and had old-fashioned ideas about appropriate business relationships. She'd met him twice at company events, and both times he'd looked right through her as if she didn't exist. "This isn't about money," David said weakly. "Everything is about money, son." Janet's voice had turned gentle, almost loving. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to protect you. Protect our family name. Your children would be confused, never fitting in anywhere. It's better to end this now before real damage is done." The sound of chair legs scraping against hardwood made Simone realize the conversation was ending. Panic shot through her like electricity. She couldn't let them find her here, couldn't let them know she'd heard their plan to destroy her life. Moving as quietly as possible, she crept toward the front door, her designer heels clicking softly against the marble floor. But as she reached for the doorknob, her purse strap caught on the small table by the entrance. The crash of her grandmother's antique hand mirror hitting the floor seemed to echo through the entire house like thunder. What was that? David's voice called out from the study. Simone's mind went blank. 3 years of Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and conversations about their future together flashed before her eyes. She thought about the wedding dress hanging in her closet back home, the invitations already sent, the flowers ordered, the church booked. She thought about how proud her mother Grace had been when David proposed, how her grandmother Ruby had cried tears of joy and said she could finally rest easy knowing Simone would be taken care of. Footsteps approached the hallway. In seconds, David would appear and find her standing there with tears streaming down her face and the broken pieces of her grandmother's mirror scattered at her feet. She'd have to pretend she hadn't heard anything, smile and kiss him hello, and act like her world hadn't just crumbled into dust. Or she could run. The front door felt impossibly heavy as she pulled it open and stepped into the cool October evening. Behind her, she heard David calling her name, confusion clear in his voice. She must have left some sign of her presence. The pie box on the kitchen counter, her car keys dropped somewhere in her panic. She ran to her car with tears blurring her vision, fumbling with her keys while David's voice grew louder behind her. The engine turned over just as she saw him appear in the doorway, his face a mask of concern and guilt. For a split second, their eyes met across the driveway. In that moment, she saw the truth written all over his face. He'd known she was there. He'd known she'd heard everything. And he'd let her hear it. As she backed out of the driveway, her headlights swept across the front of the house she'd imagined calling home someday. Every window glowed warmly, like something from a magazine spread about perfect American families. But now she knew what lurked behind those beautiful facades, What kind of conversations happened in those elegant rooms when people like her weren't supposed to be listening? The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur of street lights and tears. By the time she pulled into her parking spot, her phone had buzzed with 12 missed calls from David and 6 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. She turned the phone off without reading them and sat in her car, staring up at her own apartment building. Tomorrow she'd have to start making phone calls. To the caterer, the florist, the church. She'd have to tell her mother that the wedding was off, watch the disappointment cloud Grace's eyes. She'd have to face her grandmother Ruby and explain that the man she'd brought home for Sunday dinner wasn't the man they thought he was. But tonight, she just sat in her car and cried for the future that had died in the space of a single overheard conversation. She cried for the naive woman who'd walked into that house with homemade pie and a heart full of love. She cried for every compromise she'd made, every uncomfortable moment she'd brushed aside, every time she'd made herself smaller to fit into David's world. And somewhere in the depths of her grief, a tiny flame of something else began to flicker. Something that felt suspiciously like relief. The morning sun streaming through Simone's bedroom curtains felt like an assault on her swollen eyes. She'd finally fallen asleep around 4 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes, her engagement ring twisted uncomfortably around her finger. The events of the previous evening felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her phone had been buzzing continuously since she turned it back on 20 minutes ago. 17 missed calls from David, 4 from her mother, and 3 from Destiny, her best friend and maid of honor. The text messages were even worse. David's messages went from confused to panicked to angry and back to confused again. Simone, where did you go? I saw your car leaving. Call me back. Baby, something happened at the house. My parents said some things. Let me explain. I'm coming over. We need to talk about this. Why won't you answer your phone? This is crazy. The latest message had come in just 10 minutes ago. I'm outside your apartment. I know you're in there. Please just let me explain. Simone pulled her robe tighter around herself and peeked through the blinds. Sure enough, David's silver BMW sat in the parking lot below, and she could see his familiar silhouette pacing back and forth beside it. Even from 3 floors up, his frustration was evident in every line of his body. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Simone? Honey, it's me. Her mother's voice carried the special tone Grace Carter reserved for life's most difficult moments. The same voice she'd used when Simone's father passed away 10 years ago. With shaking hands, Simone unlocked the door. Grace stood in the hallway holding a thermos of coffee and a bag of fresh biscuits from their favorite bakery downtown. Her mother's dark eyes, so much like Simone's own, immediately took in her daughter's tear-stained face and wrinkled clothes. Oh, baby girl, Grace whispered, pulling Simone into the kind of hug that only mothers can give, the kind that makes you feel 5 years old again, safe and protected from the world's cruelties. They sat together on Simone's couch while Grace poured coffee from the thermos into 2 mugs. The familiar ritual of sharing morning coffee had been their tradition since Simone was old enough to drink it with lots of milk and sugar. Now the warm liquid felt like medicine for her raw throat. David's been calling me since 6 this morning, Grace said gently. Says there was some kind of misunderstanding, that you ran out of his house without explanation. He sounds real upset. There wasn't any misunderstanding, Mama. Simone's voice came out hoarse and broken. I heard exactly what he and his parents think about me. About us. About what our children would look like. Grace's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. What are you talking about, honey? The whole story spilled out, arriving early with the pie, overhearing the conversation, the cold calculation in their voices as they planned to end her relationship. Grace listened without interruption, her face growing harder with each detail. And David? Grace asked quietly. What did he say when they talked about ending things? He was worried about his career. About what people would think. He never once said he loved me, never once told them they were wrong. Simone twisted her engagement ring around her finger. I think maybe he was relieved. Like they were giving him permission to do what he'd wanted to do all along. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Simone. David's voice called through the wood. I know you're in there. Your mother's car is in the parking lot. Grace's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You want me to send him away? Before Simone could answer, her phone rang. Destiny's name appeared on the screen, and she answered it gratefully. Her best friend's voice was breathless with excitement. Girl, you will not believe what just happened. I was at the hotel finalizing the reception setup when Janet Mitchell called the venue directly. She tried to cancel your wedding, claiming there was a family emergency and you decided to postpone indefinitely. Simone's blood turned to ice. She what? The hotel manager was confused because the reservation was in your name, not theirs, so legally she couldn't do anything. But get this, she offered to pay a cancellation fee if they'd release the date. Like she was trying to buy your wedding date right out from under you. Grace's face had gone very still, the way it did when she was controlling her temper. Put that phone on speaker, baby. Mrs. Carter? Destiny's voice filled the room. I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I should call you first or Simone, but this whole thing felt wrong. Real wrong. You did right, honey, Grace said firmly. What else did she say? She asked a lot of questions about the guest list, like who was coming from Simone's side. When I wouldn't tell her anything, she got nasty. Said the whole wedding was inappropriate and that someone needed to talk sense into Simone before she embarrassed herself further. The knocking at the door had stopped, but now Simone could hear David's voice through the window, talking rapidly on his phone. Pieces of his conversation drifted up. Handle this. Told you I would. Give me more time. Destiny, I need you to do me a favor, Simone said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. Call everyone, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, everyone. Tell them the wedding is postponed indefinitely. Simone, no. Grace reached for her daughter's hand. Don't make any big decisions when you're this hurt. Maybe David can explain Dash. Mama, his mother tried to cancel my wedding behind my back. She was willing to pay money to make sure it didn't happen. You think that's something David didn't know about? The apartment fell silent except for the sound of David's car engine starting up outside. Through the window, they watched his BMW pull out of the parking lot, heading back toward the world where Simone had never truly belonged. I'll make those calls, Destiny said softly. But Simone, I need you to know something. When Mrs. Mitchell was talking to the hotel manager, she said something else. She said David had been having second thoughts for months, that he'd confided in them about his concerns. She made it sound like calling off the wedding was his idea, and they were just helping him do what he couldn't do himself. Simone closed her eyes and let the truth wash over her. All those times David had seemed distracted lately, all those conversations about their future that he'd deflected or changed the subject on. The way he'd grown increasingly uncomfortable when she talked about children, about the kind of life they'd build together. He never loved me, she whispered. Not really. He loved the idea of me, maybe. The challenge of dating someone different. But when it came time to actually build a life together, that's his loss, Grace said fiercely. And better you find out now than after you've said vows in front of God and everyone. But even as her mother spoke words of comfort, Simone felt the weight of what lay ahead. She'd have to face everyone, their friends, her co-workers, her church family. She'd have to answer questions and endure pity and watch people whisper about the woman who almost married above her station and got put back in her place. The engagement ring slipped off her finger easily, as if it had never really belonged there. She set it on the coffee table where it caught the morning light, a beautiful lie sparkling in the sun. I'm going to see Grandma Ruby, she said suddenly. I need to tell her before she hears it from someone else. Grace nodded. She's going to want to come over here and give that boy a piece of her mind. For the first time since yesterday evening, Simone almost smiled. She's going to say she never trusted him. She's going to be right, Grace replied. Your grandmother has been reading people for 62 years. She saw something in David that the rest of us missed. As Simone went to get dressed, she caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror. Her face was puffy from crying, her hair was a mess, and her eyes looked like they belonged to someone much older. But underneath all that pain and exhaustion, she saw something else, something that looked almost like determination. Maybe Destiny was right. Maybe this was David's loss, not hers. But first, she had to survive telling the most important woman in her life that her fairy tale was over. Ruby Thompson's house sat on a quiet street in the heart of Atlanta's historic Sweet Auburn district, a modest brick home with a front porch that had witnessed 60 years of neighborhood changes. The scent of fresh cornbread wafted through the screen door as Simone and Grace climbed the familiar front steps, their footsteps echoing with the weight of difficult news. Before they could even knock, the front door swung open. Ruby stood there in her favorite apron, the one with tiny yellow flowers that had faded from countless washings, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 62, she moved with the grace of someone who'd learned to navigate life's storms with dignity intact. Come on in here, baby girl, Ruby said, wrapping Simone in arms that smelled like vanilla and wisdom. I've been expecting you. Simone pulled back, surprised. Expecting me? Ruby's dark eyes, sharp as ever behind wire-rimmed glasses, held a knowing look. Child, I've been praying since 5 this morning. The Lord woke me up with you heavy on my heart. I knew something was coming. They settled into Ruby's living room, where family photos covered every surface and the old piano in the corner held sheet music from last Sunday's church service. Ruby disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a plate of still warm cornbread and honey butter, the same comfort food she'd been making for 3 generations of family sorrows. "Now," Ruby said, settling into her favorite recliner with the authority of a woman who'd raised 4 children and helped raise a dozen grandchildren, "tell your grandmama what that boy did." The story poured out again, but this time Simone found herself watching Ruby's face for reactions. Her grandmother listened without surprise, occasionally nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were clicking into place in her mind. "I knew it," Ruby said quietly when Simone finished. "I knew that boy wasn't right for you." "Mama, you never said anything," Grace protested. "You were always nice to David." "Being nice and approving are 2 different things," Ruby replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "I was raised to be polite to guests in my house, but that doesn't mean I had to like what I saw." She turned to Simone, her expression gentle but serious. "Baby, do you remember what I told you when you first brought that boy home for Sunday dinner?" Simone thought back to that day 2 years ago when David had been nervous and overly charming, trying too hard to impress everyone. You said that a man who really loves a woman doesn't try to change her to fit his world. He makes room for her in it exactly as she is." "That's right." "And what did David do from day one?" The answer hit Simone like cold water. "He started suggesting changes. The way I dressed for his company events. The way I talked around his friends. Even the way I did my hair." Ruby's knowing hum spoke volumes. "Love doesn't try to remake you, honey. Love celebrates who you already are." Grace leaned forward, her own understanding dawning. "Is that why you always asked him so many questions about his family? You were testing him?" "I was listening," Ruby corrected. "Listening to how he talked about his people, his work, his plans for the future. And you know what I never heard? I never heard him talk about Simone like she was part of those plans. She was always separate, always something he had to figure out how to fit in." Simone felt tears threatening again, but they were different this time, not the desperate tears of betrayal, but the cleansing tears of recognition. "I thought if I just tried harder, if I could make his parents like me." "Baby girl, you can't love someone into loving you back. Not the real kind of love anyway." Ruby reached over and took Simone's hands in her weathered ones. "That boy liked the idea of you. Liked how different you were, how it made him feel special to be with someone like you. But when it came time to choose between you and his comfort, between you and what was easy, he chose what was easy," Simone whispered, "and showed you exactly who he is in the process." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the old grandfather clock in the corner marking time with its steady tick. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood waking up filtered through the windows, children heading to school, neighbors calling greetings across yards, the familiar rhythms of a community that had embraced Simone since birth. "I feel so stupid," Simone said finally. "All those signs I ignored, all those times I made excuses for him and his family." "Don't you do that," Ruby's voice sharpened with protective love. "Don't you take responsibility for his choices. You loved with your whole heart the way you were raised to love. That's not stupid, that's brave." "But everyone's going to think dash. Everyone's going to think what they think regardless," Ruby interrupted. "Some folks will pity you, some will say they saw it coming, some will just be glad for the gossip. But the people who matter, the ones who really know you, they're going to see this for what it is. They're going to see you standing up for yourself instead of settling for less than you deserve." Grace had been quiet through this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Simone, honey, I need to tell you something. Last month, when David came over to help with the gutters, he asked me about your inheritance from your father." Simone's head snapped up. "What about it?" "He wanted to know how much it was, whether you planned to use it for the house down payment or keep it separate. When I told him that was between you and him to discuss, he got uncomfortable. Started talking about how married couples shouldn't have secrets about money." Ruby's expression darkened. "That boy was counting your money before he even said, 'I do.' Why didn't you tell me?" Simone asked. "Because I thought maybe I was being overprotective," Grace admitted. "I thought maybe he was just trying to plan for your future together. But now it looks like he was planning how to access it," Ruby finished grimly. The phone rang, cutting through the heavy moment. Ruby glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's your church secretary, baby. You want me to answer it?" Simone nodded, and Ruby picked up the phone with her customary warmth. "Good morning, Sister Patricia." "Yes, she's right here." "What's that now?" Ruby's expression grew increasingly stern as she listened. "I see. No, you did absolutely right to call. We'll handle it from here. Thank you, honey. She hung up and turned to face both women, her jaw set in a way that meant trouble for someone. That was about your wedding, Simone? Seems David's mother called the church this morning, trying to speak to Pastor Williams about postponing due to family concerns. When Sister Patricia explained that only the bride and groom could make changes to their ceremony, Mrs. Mitchell got real nasty. What did she say? Grace asked, though her tone suggested she already knew it wouldn't be good. She told Sister Patricia that the wedding was a mistake, that David was having serious doubts about marrying someone from such a different background, and that the church should be more careful about the kinds of unions it blesses. Simone felt the blood drain from her face. She said that to Sister Patricia? At our church. She did. And Sister Patricia, bless her heart, told Mrs. Mitchell that New Hope Baptist has been blessing unions between God's children for 90 years, and they weren't about to stop based on one woman's prejudice. Despite everything, Simone found herself smiling at the image of sweet 70-year-old Sister Patricia going toe-to-toe with Janet Mitchell. The church secretary might look like everyone's favorite grandmother, but she had the heart of a lioness when it came to protecting her congregation. That woman has some nerve, Grace said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Calling our church, trying to interfere in our business. She's desperate, Ruby observed. Desperate people do desperate things. But you know what this tells us? It tells us they know David won't have the backbone to end this himself. They're trying to do it for him. Simone stood up suddenly, surprising both women. I need to call David. Honey, Grace started. No, Mama. I need to hear it from him. I need to look him in the eye and ask him straight out. Do you want to marry me? Not do his parents approve, not is it convenient for his career. Do you want to marry me? Ruby smiled for the first time that morning. Now you're talking like my granddaughter. And if he says no? Then at least you'll know the truth, Simone replied, feeling stronger than she had since walking into that house yesterday. And I can stop wondering if I'm giving up on something real. But even as she made the decision to confront David, a part of her already knew what his answer would be. The boy who'd let his parents plan to destroy their relationship behind his back, who'd asked about her inheritance before their wedding, who'd never once defended her when she wasn't there to hear it, that boy had already given her his answer. She just needed to hear him say it out loud. David's downtown office building gleamed in the afternoon sun, all glass and steel reaching toward Atlanta's skyline like a monument to ambition. Simone sat in her car in the parking garage for 10 minutes, gathering the courage to face the conversation that would end her engagement once and for all. She'd called ahead, asking David's secretary to let him know she was coming. The woman's voice had been carefully neutral, professional in a way that made Simone wonder what David had told his colleagues about their relationship status. Word traveled fast in corporate circles, especially when it involved personal drama. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt endless. Simone caught her reflection in the polished doors. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that made her feel confident and professional. If this was going to be their final conversation, she wanted to face it looking like the successful, accomplished woman she was, not the heartbroken girl who'd run away yesterday. David's corner office overlooked the city, with framed diplomas and achievement awards covering one wall. He stood with his back to the door when she entered, staring out at the view that had once represented everything he'd worked to achieve. You came, he said without turning around. We need to talk. Finally he faced her. David looked tired, older than his 30 years, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept any better than she had. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie slightly askew, small details that spoke of a man under pressure. Simone, I can explain everything you heard yesterday. Can you? She settled into the chair across from his desk, crossing her legs and fixing him with a steady look. Because I've been thinking about it all night, and I can't figure out how you explain letting your parents plan to end our engagement without saying a single word in my defense. David's face flushed. It wasn't like that. They caught me off guard, started talking about things I hadn't considered. Like what? Like the fact that I'm black? Because I'm pretty sure you noticed that 3 years ago when we started dating. Don't make this about race, David said quickly, moving behind his desk like he needed the furniture between them for protection. This is about compatibility. About whether we really want the same things. What do we want that's so different, David? I want a husband who loves me, children who feel secure in their identity, a home where I'm not constantly trying to prove I belong. What do you want? He was quiet for so long that Simone began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want things to be easy. Easy. Yes. I want to go to company events without wondering if people are staring at us. I want to introduce you to clients without worrying about whether it will hurt my business. I want our kids to fit in at the country club, to get into the right schools, to never have to explain themselves. Each word hit Simone like a physical blow, but she kept her expression steady. And you think being married to me would make all of that hard? I don't know. The outburst seemed to surprise David as much as it did Simone. Maybe. Probably. My parents have connections, influence. The Henderson account alone could set us up for life, but Jonathan Henderson is traditional, set in his ways. Racist, you mean? David winced. I wouldn't use that word. What word would you use for a man who won't do business with you if you marry a black woman? It's complicated, Simone. Business relationships are built on trust, on shared values, on shared skin color. That's not fair. Simone stood up, her composure finally cracking. What's not fair is spending 3 years with someone who's been calculating whether loving me is worth the cost to his career. What's not fair is making wedding plans with a man who's been hoping I'd somehow become more acceptable to his family and friends. I never said that. You didn't have to. Every suggestion about changing my hair, my clothes, the way I talk, you were trying to make me more palatable to your world. And when that didn't work, when your parents finally said what you'd been thinking all along. I wasn't thinking that, David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then why didn't you defend me? Yesterday when your father called me her kind, and your mother talked about our future children being confused, where were you? Where was the man who claimed to love me? David sank into his chair, the fight going out of him. I panicked. They'd been in my ear for months about the engagement, about whether I was making the right choice. When they started talking like that, I froze. For 3 hours, David. You froze for 3 hours while they planned how to destroy our relationship. That's not panic, that's permission. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of unspoken truths. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued its busy rhythm, people pursuing their lives and dreams while hers crumbled in a corporate office high above the streets. I do love you, David said finally. But maybe love isn't enough. You're right, Simone replied, surprising him. Love isn't enough. It also takes courage, commitment, and the willingness to fight for each other. And you've shown me you don't have any of those things. She pulled her engagement ring from her purse and placed it on his desk. The diamond caught the afternoon light, sparkling with false promises and broken dreams. I'm calling off the wedding, she said. I'll handle the vendors, the church, everything. You don't have to worry about the mess, I'll clean it up myself. Simone, wait. No. She headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. David? I hope your parents are right about the Henderson account. I hope it's worth what you're giving up for it. What am I giving up? She turned back to look at him one last time, seeing not the man she'd loved but the boy who'd chosen comfort over courage, status over substance. You're giving up the woman who would have loved you through anything. Who would have built a life with you, supported your dreams, stood by you no matter what anyone said. You're giving up children who would have been raised to be proud of both sides of their heritage, to be strong and kind and brave. You're giving up Sunday dinners with a family who would have welcomed you completely, no questions asked, no conditions attached. David's face had gone pale. Simone. But mostly you're giving up the chance to be the man I thought you were. The man who would have chosen love over fear, who would have been proud to call me his wife instead of worried about what other people thought. She opened the door, then looked back one final time. I hope the Henderson account makes you happy, David. I really do. Because it's all you've got left. The elevator doors closed on David's stricken face, and Simone finally allowed herself to breathe. It was over. 3 years gone. A future she'd planned and dreamed about, erased. But as the elevator descended toward the parking garage, she realized something surprising. She felt lighter than she had in months. Her phone buzzed with a text from Destiny. How did it go? Simone typed back, it's over. Officially over. Meet me at Grandma Ruby's. I need my family right now. Because that's what she had, what she'd always had. A family who loved her unconditionally, friends who would stand by her through anything, a community that had raised her to know her worth. David's world might not have had room for her, but her world had always been big enough for anyone with love in their heart. The engagement was over. But maybe, just maybe, her real life was about to begin. 6 months later, Simone stood in the community center gymnasium, watching as 30 young girls practiced their choreography for the annual Sweet Auburn Heritage Festival. The sound of sneakers squeaking on polished floors and voices calling out dance counts filled the air, along with something that had been missing from her life for too long: genuine laughter. "Miss Simone, do you think we're ready for Saturday?" 8-year-old Imani bounced on her toes with excitement, her hair adorned with colorful ribbons that matched her dance costume. "I think you girls are going to be amazing," Simone replied, adjusting one of the sequin headpieces. "But remember what we talked about, it's not about being perfect. It's about celebrating who you are and where you come from." "My mama says you used to work at one of those big fancy companies downtown," said Kendra, a 9-year-old with bright eyes and an even brighter smile. "How come you work with us now?" Simone smiled, remembering the corporate job she'd left 3 months ago to start her own cultural arts program for young girls in the community. "Sometimes life shows you that what you thought you wanted isn't what's going to make you happy. Working with you girls makes me happier than any fancy office ever did." It was true. After calling off the wedding, Simone had thrown herself back into work, trying to lose herself in marketing campaigns and client presentations. But every day felt hollow, like she was going through the motions of someone else's life. It was Ruby who'd suggested she think about what really brought her joy, what made her feel most like herself. The answer had come to her during a conversation with Pastor Williams about the church's youth programs. They needed someone to help the young girls develop confidence and cultural pride, someone who could teach them that their heritage was something to celebrate, not hide from. Within weeks, Simone had submitted her resignation and used her father's inheritance, the money David had been so interested in, to start Roots and Wings, a non-profit program combining cultural education with mentorship. "Miss Simone, someone's here to see you," called Destiny from the gymnasium entrance. She was grinning in a way that meant she knew something Simone didn't. Simone looked up to see a tall, dark-skinned man in his early 30s standing beside Destiny. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his smile warm and genuine as he watched the girls practice their routine. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. "Ladies, keep practicing. Miss Destiny will help you while I talk to our visitor," Simone called out, then walked over to meet the stranger. "You probably don't remember me," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Williams, Pastor Williams' nephew. We met briefly at your grandmother's birthday party last year." The memory clicked into place. Ruby's 71st birthday celebration at the church fellowship hall, back when Simone had been so focused on wedding planning that she'd barely noticed the handsome man helping serve cake to the elderly church members. "Of course. You're the teacher, right? You work with special needs children." Guilty as charged. His smile was easy, unpretentious. "I teach at the elementary school about 10 minutes from here. My Aunt Pastor Williams' wife told me about what you're doing with these girls. I was wondering if I could volunteer some time, maybe help with the boys' program you're planning to start." Simone felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in months. Genuine interest in getting to know someone new. "That would be wonderful. We're always looking for positive male role models." "Actually," Marcus said, glancing around at the busy gymnasium, "I was hoping I could talk to you about it over coffee sometime. If you're interested, that is. No pressure." Before Simone could answer, Imani came running over, tugging on her hand. Miss Simone, Miss Simone." Kendra fell and scraped her knee. "Oh no, let me see." Simone hurried over to where Kendra sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face as she looked at a small scrape on her knee. "It's okay, baby. It's just a little cut." To her surprise, Marcus knelt down beside Kendra with practiced ease. "Hey there, young lady. I'm Mr. Marcus. Can I take a look at that knee?" Kendra nodded, sniffling. Marcus examined the scrape with gentle hands, then pulled a small pack of colorful bandages from his pocket. "Good news, no broken bones, nothing serious. But I think this calls for a special bandage. What's your favorite color?" "Purple," Kendra whispered. "Purple it is." Marcus carefully cleaned the scrape and applied a purple bandage decorated with little stars. "There. Now you're officially a warrior princess, ready for battle." Kendra giggled, the tears forgotten. "Really?" "Absolutely. All the best warrior princesses have battle scars. It shows how brave they are." As Marcus helped Kendra back to her feet, Simone found herself studying him with new interest. David had never been comfortable around children, always seeming awkward and unsure when they visited families with kids. But Marcus moved with easy confidence, speaking to Kendra like she was a person worth listening to, not just a small interruption to adult conversation. "You carry bandages in your pocket?" Simone asked as they walked back toward Destiny. "Occupational hazard of working with kids," Marcus replied with a grin. "That, plus hand sanitizer, extra pencils, and usually at least 3 different snacks. Sounds like you're prepared for anything." "I try to be." He paused, then added quietly, "My students taught me that sometimes the smallest gestures make the biggest difference. A bandage, a kind word, showing up when you say you will, these things matter more than grand gestures." Something in his tone made Simone look at him more carefully. There was depth there, a quiet strength that reminded her of her father. The kind of man who showed love through actions, not just words. "About that coffee," she said impulsively. "I'd like that." Marcus's smile was radiant. "Really? Great. How about Saturday after the festival performance? I'd love to see the girls perform first." "You want to come to the festival?" "I wouldn't miss it. Community events like this are important. They remind kids where they come from, help them see their culture as something beautiful." As if summoned by their conversation, Ruby appeared at Simone's elbow. At 72, her grandmother still moved with purpose, her silver hair perfectly styled and her eyes missing nothing. "And who might this handsome young man be?" Ruby asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Grandma Ruby, this is Marcus Williams, Pastor Williams' nephew." "Marcus, this is my grandmother, Ruby Thompson." "Mrs. Thompson, it's an honor." Marcus shook Ruby's hand with genuine respect. "Pastor Williams talks about you all the time. Says you're the backbone of New Hope Baptist." "That man exaggerates," Ruby said, but she was clearly pleased. "Are you the teacher he's always bragging about? The one who got those special certificates for working with children?" "He talks too much," Marcus replied, but his embarrassment was endearing rather than defensive. "No such thing as talking too much about good people doing good work." Ruby's approving look wasn't lost on Simone. Her grandmother had barely tolerated David, but she was practically beaming at Marcus. "Miss Simone, we're ready to run through the whole routine," called out one of the older girls. As Simone moved back toward her dancers, she caught Ruby and Marcus talking quietly. Her grandmother was probably interrogating the poor man about his intentions, his family, his prospects. The same question she'd asked David, though David had always seemed annoyed by Ruby's curiosity while Marcus appeared genuinely interested in answering. The next hour flew by as the girls ran through their complete festival performance. Simone found herself stealing glances at Marcus, who watched the entire rehearsal with focused attention, applauding enthusiastically and offering genuine encouragement to the dancers. When practice ended and the girls were collected by their families, Marcus helped stack chairs and sweep the floor without being asked. David had always found excuses to avoid community events, claiming he was too busy or that they weren't his scene. But Marcus moved through the cleanup like he belonged there, chatting easily with parents and grandparents, remembering names and asking follow-up questions about things discussed weeks ago. "He's a good one," Ruby said quietly as they watched Marcus help an elderly church member carry folding tables to her car. "Grandma, I just met him properly today." "Child, I've been watching people for 72 years. That boy has kind eyes and gentle hands. More importantly, he sees you, really sees you, not what he wishes you were or what he thinks you should become." Simone looked over at Marcus, who was now helping Imani tie her shoes while her mother gathered her dance bag. He caught Simone's eye and smiled, not the practiced charm she'd grown used to with David, but something warm and genuine that made her feel seen and appreciated exactly as she was. "It's too soon," Simone said softly. "The engagement ended 6 months ago. People will talk." "Let them talk," Ruby replied firmly. "You spent 3 years trying to fit into the wrong man's life. Don't spend another day worrying about what people think about you living your own." As families filtered out of the gymnasium, Marcus approached them with his easy smile. "Saturday at 2 then? After the girls perform?" "Saturday at 2, Simone confirmed. "Looking forward to it." He headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Mrs. Thompson, it was truly a pleasure meeting you. I hope I'll see you again soon." After he left, Ruby chuckled softly. "That boy has manners. Real ones, not the fake kind that disappear when no one important is watching." Driving home that evening, Simone thought about the difference between the two men. David had been handsome in a polished, magazine cover way, always impeccably dressed and conscious of how they looked together. Marcus was attractive in a more natural way, laugh lines around his eyes, calloused hands from honest work, clothes chosen for comfort rather than impression. David had talked about their future in terms of acquiring things, houses, cars, memberships, status symbols. Marcus had spent an hour asking about her program goals, her vision for helping young people, what drove her passion for cultural education. Most tellingly, David had never once asked about her father, the man whose love and values had shaped her into who she was. But Marcus had noticed her father's picture on the gym wall, part of a memorial display for community leaders, and asked thoughtful questions about his legacy and influence. That night, Simone called her mother to tell her about the encounter. "A teacher?" Grace mused approvingly. "Your father always said teachers were the real heroes, shaping young minds, working for love instead of money." "It's just coffee, Mama. One coffee date with a nice man." "Honey, there's nothing just about coffee with the right person. Sometimes the best relationships start with the simplest moments." As Simone got ready for bed, she found herself looking forward to Saturday in a way she hadn't looked forward to anything in months. Not because Marcus might be the one, it was far too early for such thoughts, but because for the first time since her engagement ended, she felt curious about the future instead of haunted by the past. The festival was this Saturday. Coffee with a kind, interesting man who carried bandages for scraped knees and asked thoughtful questions about her work. A new chapter beginning, not with grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations, but with the simple pleasure of getting to know someone who seemed to genuinely want to know her. Maybe Ruby was right. Maybe it was time to stop worrying about what people thought and start living her own life. Maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come.